In a recent video, we showed you how to build a multi-language chatbot that reliably responds to users in the language they speak to it in. The method in that video was tailored to the autonomous node. But as your bot gets more complicated, you'll have more isolated cards with hard-coded text that aren't governed by the autonomous node. In this video, I'll show you how to make sure all the text across your bot gets translated while avoiding unnecessary AI overhead. Let's roll. So here we have the bot from last time. Now to recap, when we speak to this bot, it determines which language we're speaking to it in, and then it injects into the prompt which language we're speaking to it in, so it'll always address the user in their chosen language. Now, in a lot of cases, we're gonna wanna hard code values, and it would be inefficient to have the AI determine those values every single time. So I'll show you how we can work with hard-coded values and still use translation. For this example, I wanna add a workflow to this bot that, at the end of the conversation, gathers analytics about where the user heard about the restaurant. So to do that, I'm going to create a new workflow and call it analytics. It's just going to ask the user a multiple choice question about where they heard of them. And I'm going to put in these values: social media, friends and family, online search. So when we start a conversation, it asks you how you heard of us, and then it gives you all the options here. Now, inside our bot, we're going to want the autonomous node to redirect us to that workflow at the end of the conversation. So we give it access to that workflow, and then we add an instruction when the conversation's ending, user to the analytics workflow. In this case, the autonomous node will determine when to redirect the user. Since it happens at the end of the conversation, why don't we throw a little exit note on there to end? Perfect. So this is all fine and well if the conversation's taking place in English. But the whole purpose of this bot is to generalize to situations where the user doesn't speak English. So what we could do is just have an autonomous node determine all these values at every single pass. So what we're gonna do is create a new table and call that the analytics text table. It's because it's for the analytics workflow, and we use it just to get the text for analytics. Now we're gonna add the columns language, question, and answers. And we wanna make sure answers is an array of strings. Now to add values into this row, we're gonna right click anywhere on the row, hit edit row, and language is English. Question, how did you hear? Answers, and we're going to plug in the values: family, online search, advertisement, or other. So now, instead of hard coding the values into this card over here, what we're going to do is grab them from the table. So the first thing we have to do is create an analytics text variable. And we're going to make that an object. Now what we want to do is grab that data from the table we just created. So I'll show you how to do that using an execute code card. Call the analytics text table, and we look for records. This here is the syntax you use to search for exact fields in a table. Language. Recall that we made the languages lowercase in our table. What it's going to return is an array of all the rows it's recovered. Now, there's two possible cases. The first case is that it finds at least one row, or it doesn't because they're speaking in a language that we don't have logged in the table, which is every language other than English. So if we have recovered rows from the table, we'll bind that to the analytics text variable. Cool. If we find a row in the table where language matches the lowercase version of conversation.language, then we bind question and answers as an object to the analytics text workflow variable. If not, this is going to remain undefined. So we have to control for that case now. So we're going to add an expression card. We're going to hard code it. So the condition here is if workflow analytics text not equals undefined. So if something was found, and if so, we're in business, we move on, and we pass those values here. So workflow.analytics text question. Otherwise, workflow.analytics text dot answers, which is an array. It's going to be all the options. Now, just for fun, let's try it out. So we're going to go through the AI task where we determine the language that the user is speaking, and then that's going to get passed to the analytics workflow. Okay, cool. It found all the values through the table. I'm happy with that. Now the other case here is what we do if nothing is found in the table. In this case, what we want to do is translate the values, in this case, the English values, because those are the base values. You could, of course, pick any language. We want to translate that, and then we want to store those values in the table so that next time someone comes in speaking that language, let's say it's French, then the French values are already going to have been generated and exist in this table. Let's have a look. So analytics, we have the case where the language is not found. What we're actually going to do is add another execute code card. This time, we're going to pull out the same English text because it's the base text. In this case, we're actually just looking for the English text. Remember, lowercase. What you could also do is define something called base inside your table and have that be the base text. Now what we want to do is create another variable called analytics base text. This is the text that we're going to have to translate. It is an object. Same thing as before, question, answer equals text 0. We're going to bind that to the base text variable. Cool. And now you want to take those values and, similar to the way we determine the user's language, we're going to pass an AI task here and tell it to translate the incoming text. So in this case, we say translate the following into the conversation.language. That's going to be dynamic while preserving its structure and the names of its keys. And then the answer is going to go into workflow.analytics text. Let's give it some instructions. At the end of this information is going to be inside workflow.analytics text, which is what happens here in the positive case. So we can move on to the multiple choice. Like I said, we want to be able to store this value for future customers who also speak whatever language this is. So we want to upload that to the table, create a new record in the table, analytics text. We lowercase the language. And then in analytics text table, create a new record, question, answers that are derived from analytics text. At the end of all this, we pass that to our multiple choice question and we fill in the values based on analytics text. So let's restart, see how it goes. Hola. Oh, you know what? Because this is an object, we can't map undefined. So here, what we're going to do, check if there are any keys or the keys have any length. Let's try that again. Hola. Cool. So it asked the right question and it recovered all those values. It looked like it worked well. Now let's check out the table to see if it created that new record. And there you have it. It has the question and it has all the options translated from English into Spanish. So now that we've seen a translation workflow, I would like to abstract the translation logic to its own dedicated workflow so that you can add translation to any other workflow you want in the future that has hard-coded values. Let's create another workflow and call it translation. Now it's going to have most of the same components as the translation part of this one, but it's going to be a little bit more abstracted back so that it could apply to other workflows. We want to create text. That's like the analytics text. So workflow variable. And we'll also create base text since we know now that we're going to need it. One more thing we're going to need is the name of the table. In this case, it would be analytics table. So the first thing we want to do is take the logic from here and abstract that for the situation where it could theoretically be any table name. Now we're accessing the table name as a variable, which means we're going to have to change that since the table name is dynamic. So the way we do that is with the client.findTableRow function that takes the table name as a variable. And then you can pass the same filter key to this function. So we get translations, we'll replace this. This returns an object with the rows key, and then that includes the array with all the recovered rows. So as long as the length is not equal to 0, we bind that to the text variable. Now we're going to add the same control statement that we added before, except we're going to have to replace the variable name so that they match our variables. Workflow.text. Now, in that case, what we're going to do is exit with the variable text. So then that variable can then be accessed in whichever workflow called this. In this case, analytics is going to call translate, and it's going to be able to access this text variable with the workflow.translate.text variable. So I'll show you how that looks. So first of all, we're going to have table name be an entry variable for that to work. Translate. And the table name, we're going to hard code that value since we know what it's going to be. Analytics text table. So from main, because we're just doing an abridged version of this so far, we go to AI task, which determines what language to bind to conversation.language. Then we head over to analytics, which first goes through the translate workflow. It sees whether we have a row in the table corresponding to the user's language. And if so, go back to analytics and plug that in to the multiple choice question. Now, we did not implement the case yet where the user is speaking a language that the table hasn't seen yet. We'll do that in a second. I forgot to bind these to the variable. These values don't exist because now we have to plug in the values that we inherited from the previous workflow, which is workflow.translate.text.question. So now we have to implement the translate case, which I think you're already pretty much ready for. In fact, I wonder if I could just copy everything over from analytics. Make sure the variables are right. Base text. Now here's the part where it gets a little more complicated because we don't actually have all the keys that we had before. This time around, we have to generalize about the rows. So we'll actually call it base rows. We take out all of the columns that are generic that belong to every table. Let me show you. The values we can expect to see are stale, ID, created at, updated at, and then everything else we want to translate. This is the actual content that we're looking for. We'll do that by object destructuring. So we'll grab all the columns that we don't want and leave everything else. Now we add a new node with an AI task and add the same instructions as before. And base text, let's give it a little instruction and output the value into workflow.text. And finally, just like before, we want to upload that into the table. All right, so it looks like everything worked. Let's check out to see if it worked in the table. Yeah, it worked from the translation workflow. So to summarize again, the main workflow called the analytics workflow, usually the autonomous node is going to determine when to do that. But for debugging, we went straight to it. Analytics runs to the translate workflow, but passes the name of the table that we need to look at to find the text we're looking. Now, in the event that the user is speaking in a language that the bot is familiar with, we grab it from the table and we pass it back to analytics. But in our case, we grab the English version from the table when we were speaking in French. We translate the English to the target language. We upload that to the table using the dynamically referenced table name. And then we finally passed the text variable to the analytics workflow, namely the multiple choice card. Now that we've come up with the translation workflow and we've seen how to apply that to workflows that contain hard-coded text, I want to create another hard-coded text workflow and apply the translation so you could see how this can be added to future workflows. So for starters, I created a text table for another workflow that'll be in case the user wants to make a reservation and the bot can handle that for the user. And it has to capture a bunch of information from the user. So their name, their party size, their email address, and the time they want to dine at. And as always, we leave a key for the language. I'm actually going to rename that to reservations text table to keep with our convention. So let's go through this new workflow, which is empty right now, and patch it together to include all the information that we're going to need to be able to integrate this workflow into our translation module. So we're going to dispatch to translate, and we pass reservation text table as a variable. It's reservations. Now, we're going to add a node that captures all the information to be able to fill out the reservation. This is maybe a little bit unrealistic because you're asking for a lot of individual inputs in a sequence. This is to illustrate how this functionality can be used for kind of any type of hard-coded workflow. So just to summarize, we go to translate, exit with the variable text. We pass that variable to each one of these. Because we've already built out our translate workflow to be modular, this should be all we need. I'm going to transition to the reservation workflow on entry and see what happens. So let's try it in English first. Okay. Cool. All right. Now let's try that in a new language, see how it works. Now, Ben 3. All right, there you go. It worked in other languages. The last thing I want to do is check the table to make sure that it actually updated the reservations table. Oh, and there you go. We have our entry in Dutch with all the translations. Then there you have it. That is how you build a translation workflow and abstract it for any kind of hard-coded workflow in Botpress. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to catch up on part 1 where I show you how to build the initial language detection flow. And if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. Also, if you want to join a community of thousands of enthusiastic bot builders, make sure you check out our Discord. I left the link down below. Peace.